News broke this week that Toronto Raptors wing OG Anunoby may be looking for a new home. How much should we buy that? And could he be the magic bullet that the Suns have been looking for to get this Deandre Ayton sign and trade done? Crossover with Locked On Raptors host Sean Woodley coming up on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendan Clean, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every single day. We have a lot to get to throughout this entire offseason. We're going to start with more news here as the calendar switches to June. It feels like Game 7 was just a bit ago, but we are really getting some distance from it, and we are also headed into the meat of the offseason. June means that it's draft month. I'll have Aaron Edwards on the show tomorrow talking about just what specifically the Suns need to change. And later in the show, we'll talk about the news of the week here in the NBA, which is OG Anunoby, one of my favorite young players in the NBA who might want to find a new home. Potentially upset with his role, potentially looking for a new team, according to Bleacher Report, Jake Fisher. We'll talk about that with Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors later in the show. But what I wanted to start with is actually a little bit bigger picture, and that's been something I've been doing all week, I guess you could say. The question I have on my mind is, has the Suns franchise turned a corner? Talked about going back to 2019 on yesterday's show and how smart the moves on the court and on the transaction side of things that the Suns made, how smart they were at that time. And the trajectory that they were on, obviously good enough to land Chris Paul and skyrocket them into this crazy couple of years. But it can be a little bit easy to lose sight of the bigger picture with all of that. And so I want to walk through why I think that the Suns maybe have turned that corner. This upcoming season will match Ryan McDonough's tenure for James Jones, the general manager of the Suns. It'll be Jones's 5th season, which was how long McDonough lasted. And that is the longest since 2010, obviously. There was only one other guy since 2010, Lance Blanks, who was, I believe, 3 seasons. So quickly, Jones will become the longest tenured GM this franchise has had in quite a long time. There's been no coach outside of Monty who's lasted more than 2 full seasons since 2010. And, of course, Monty now has finished 3. This upcoming year, next season, will be Devin Booker's 8th. And that means that he will match, 8th. I just had to make sure I had that right. Basketball Reference is telling me 6 years. It hasn't counted this past season yet. That will match Steve Nash's tenure. How long Steve Nash was here in Phoenix. The second time, obviously. So you look at that trio, 3 seasons total because Monty's the shortest of that, but 7 for Book, 4 for James, 3 for Monty. That's actually pretty good in the NBA these days to have your franchise player, your general manager, and your head coach in place for 3+ seasons. Looking through the rest of the NBA, basically right now, only the Grizzlies, Bucks, Heat, Warriors, and the Jazz, sorta. That could change for the Jazz in days. It seems like they're not convinced of keeping Quinn Snyder around. They may look to trade Gobert or Mitchell. We don't know. So the Jazz are kind of halfway in that club. Really, though, Memphis, who's everybody is basically exactly 3 years. That was the year they traded Conley, traded Gasol, hired a new coach, drafted Ja. Everything changed in 2019. So they're on the cusp of it. The Bucks have it even longer than that. Bud was hired in 2018, and their core between Middleton and Giannis has been there forever. The Heat, who got Jimmy Butler in 2019. So that's the shortest piece. And then obviously Spoelstra and Riley have been there for a decade plus each. The Warriors, who have all been there since 2014, I want to say. That's pretty darn good. And then the Jazz, who I just went over. That's it. The Nuggets just lost it because their president of basketball operations departed. They also had their GM depart last offseason, so are in 2020. The Celtics recently lost that with Danny Ainge leaving. So that 3+ seasons is a very select club. So much changes in the NBA so quickly these days that the Suns' continuity makes me believe that corner has been turned to a degree. We felt like the last thing you could have said about this Suns franchise for a long time was that it was stable. The entire roster was getting turned over around Booker every season. It felt like you had a new coach almost every year under Ryan McDonough. And, McDonough himself never quite felt like you could count on him being here for the long haul because he wasn't having success. Now, I think it would be a complete surprise if any of the trio at the top of this franchise left anytime soon. Booker's under contract for 2 years. Jones just got an extension, and Monty has 2 more years on his contract. So we are headed toward more stability, yet still. Here's the wild card, though, before we get into OG Anunoby and the craziness with Toronto. We'll go over some trade options. We'll go over if OG's actually available. And all the rest, if Ayton is a fit in Toronto. Before we get into that, the wild card here. So the Robert Sarver investigation, because, most owners have longevity. They have continuity. That's not really something we think about with ownership because teams don't change hands very often. So it's not quite how you would look at ownership, and the success of ownership is how long they've been there because it's their choice most times to give it up. Right? Most owners in the NBA have been the owner for a long time. The general manager, the coach, the players, they all change. So continuity may stay. I think we would all hope that would continue because it's been such a godsend for this Suns franchise. But we know that ownership is in a precarious spot with this investigation going on around it, which has now we're now in the 7th month of this investigation now that we are hitting June 1st here, which is, to me, frankly, I don't have a lot to say because we just still know so little, but it's embarrassing for the NBA. There's been some rumors, some weird, random, anonymous people on the internet sort of saying that they're going to wait till the end of the season. They wanted to give the Suns some distance. They don't want it to be a blemish on the most exciting time around the NBA, which is the stretch run into the playoffs, into the finals. So it feels like this might be coming down to after the finals, before the draft. So I feel like the NBA has to give the Suns notice before the offseason ramps up, before they try to fill out the roster and the coaching staff and all that stuff. You have to give some notice. I can't imagine that they would allow it to run its course, build a new roster, move forward with all this and that, and then say, oh, by the way, your owner's getting fined, or your franchise is losing draft picks, or your owner's going to have to sell the team, or any of that in August when everything's already been settled. Thing is, the Game 7 of the finals would be Sunday, June 19th. The draft is the following Thursday. We're back on normal schedule now. And, I mean, that part was kind of the same for the Suns last year after the finals. But 4 days. So it feels like that's the week that we would expect this to drop if the finals go 7 games. If they don't, I think the NBA would be thrilled to drop this further ahead of the draft and allow it to wear off in the news cycle before the draft comes. But the new owner, regardless, if there was one, and again, we don't know anything. I'm flying blind here just like you guys are. It's going to inevitably lead to change if big change has to come via the investigation. Even if it's not ownership, even if Sarver keeps this team, you would feel like there will be some firings, some new hires. The NBA will not allow them to sit idly and continue to run things with the same people and the same processes that they have. Change will come after this investigation. I don't know if it'll be ownership. I don't know if it'll be president. I don't know if it'll be front office. I would imagine it'll mostly be on the business side because a lot of this was coming from that side of things more so than Monty or James Jones or anybody that's currently running the basketball side. But change will come, and that is a big bummer because, again, continuity has become an unexpected strength, an unlikely strength of this Suns organization. I think the best case scenario is that no matter what change happens, those three guys, the trio at the top, stays in place, and we see what else happens around that. And that it just doesn't affect things too much in terms of the culture on the court that this team has been able to build. It feels like the off-court culture should change, needs to change, has to change. Let's just hope that this precarious thing can continue to go, because I think that we are onto something. Winning, investment, resources, these things tend to lead to good outcomes up and down the entire organization. And if that's what you're rooting for the people that work there and all that stuff, the city, the fans, everything, we are in a new era and it feels pretty cool. I just hope that the bad decisions that Robert Sarver seemed to have made don't run into that too badly, I guess. But that's a big picture start to the show. We'll get into the nitty gritty. We'll get into the trade stuff. That's what you're here for. After one quick break. First, today's show brought to you by Rock Auto. Told you guys, I just bought a car. My number one goal with that car was I don't want to have to deal with maintenance. And so far, 2 weeks in, no issues there. Obviously, that is a fingers crossed type of thing, because going to the dealership, going to the auto parts store even can be a big pain. You don't know what they're going to charge you. You don't know what they're going to have in stock. You don't know how long it'll take to ship. All of that stuff. Rock Auto solves it all. Save time, save money, and switch to Rock Auto. They're a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They've been doing it online for 20 years, which is pretty hard to believe. Not a lot of companies can say, we've been selling people this, whatever it is, for 20 years on the internet. That means they know what they're doing. They know what is important here, and it's quickness, it's value, cheap prices, and it's easy to use. That's really the last ingredient. RockAuto.com, very, very simple. You just type in the car that you have, scroll down to the part that you need, and hit purchase, and it's at your door within days. So go to RockAuto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com.
Now, we've heard what I think about the Raptors and their potential pursuit of Deandre Ayton, but what does someone who's watched every game of Deandre Ayton think about Deandre Ayton? Let's bring in Brendan Clean from Locked On Suns, the wonderful host over there. Brendan, thanks for being here, man. And Deandre Ayton, guy who's been sort of strangely talked about, I think, since the end of the season. There was, of course, the sort of perceived rift with Monty Williams, of course, the Game 7 collapse. Everyone got mad at him for playing video games all the time, even though it's like, who doesn't play video games all the time when you're a mid-20s NBA player who travels a lot and is on the road and has time to burn? I don't know. Maybe that's thing to not blow to proportion. Either way, before we dive into the particulars of a potential Raptors-Suns sign and trade match, let me just kind of get from you, what makes Deandre Ayton worth trading for if you are a team, any prospective team looking to get his services? Obviously, it'd be a sign and trade for most teams. I guess in some cases there's an offer sheet into cap space, but for the most part, we're looking at sign and trades. Why is he an appealing piece based on what he's done with the Suns so far?
I think it's his versatility, and that starts on the defensive end. I think he's a guy who has always, even dating back to pre-draft, I feel like I've been talking about Ayton for a really long time because we knew the Suns were going to be in position for a top pick the year he was coming out. And these trends have followed him all the way back, where it's hard to look at the box score and feel like he's making a big impact on defense. And, you know, in college and maybe his first 1 or 2 seasons in the NBA, that's really because he wasn't, but now he definitely is making an impact. And again, it comes down to that versatility. It's the ability that he has to execute any number of things you want to do defensively. He, you know, I'm sure most people watched the NBA Finals last year if they're basketball fans. He was guarding Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? And then, you know, you'll also see him then drop into the paint and maybe, you know, deflect a basket, a shot at the basket. Then, you know, the next time he might shuffle his feet and go trap a ball handler out on the perimeter. He can do all of that for you. I think his versatility is a little bit less pronounced on offense, but he is somebody who can put the ball on the ground here and there. He can finish at the basket. He can, you know, he has a limited but efficient post game. He can make a jumper for you. He can screen. He can run in transition. Like, he does everything at a B level or higher. And I think that's how he's been able to survive in the NBA in the modern era when so many guys like him don't, is he can execute anything you want, any team you're playing, he'll be able to get the job done. And I think that's why you're seeing not a lot of specific teams named in terms of interest, but you're hearing from the national reporter types that there is going to be a market for him.
Yeah, and I mean, Masai Ujiri has talked a lot about in sort of his evaluation of the Raptors and their sort of unorthodox team building concept. Like, they're only going to get a center who fits all the things they're looking for from a center. And Ayton kind of fits the bill in terms of having enough versatility to fit into what is a pretty complex scheme that asks a lot of the centers, asks, them to sort of play outside of their comfort zone a little bit as well. And I think a big thing the Raptors lacked this season, and we've talked about this on Locked On Raptors a bunch, is there weren't a ton of guys who just did center things very well, like screen or roll to the basket or post up or whatever. And for those who I think are really, really clamoring for the Raptors to add a big man, those are the kind of skills they're looking for. And Ayton seems to really check a lot of those boxes. I'm curious, we've seen centers really perform well with Chris Paul, basically as a rule, right? Like Bismack Biyombo had his best season since playing with Kyle Lowry, which perhaps is not a coincidence. Deandre Ayton's been really, really good with Chris Paul as his partner in the pick and roll. Is there any concern for you, having watched Ayton, that away from the ecosystem the Suns have set up, maybe his effectiveness is dimmed a little bit, or does he kind of do enough things in enough different ways that he can kind of survive and thrive no matter who he has around him?
I don't think he's the type of player that's going to have the same level of impact, especially on offense, if he's not around a good playmaker like Chris Paul. I think there's been a number going around that the number of shots that he had assisted this year was like 80+%, even more than Rudy Gobert, who's somebody we think of as, incapable of doing anything on offense. And Ayton needed to be fed even more than that. I don't know if I would say he needed to be fed. He was fed even more than that. So I think that there's a little bit of him that is probably there if he was more of a featured piece on offense. I talked about his post game. He has a pretty much automatic hook shot. He's been able to start to dribble a little bit more. If anybody watched any of the first round games against the Pelicans, he was, he strung together some of the best offensive shot creation games of his entire career in that series. And so you probably feel like there's something to tap into there. But I think part of the reason it's hard to know is his development just got interrupted when Chris Paul got here. He was a player, I guess it got interrupted by his own suspension first, then it got interrupted by Chris Paul coming here. And, by the time Chris Paul arrived in Phoenix, DeAndre Ayton had played that less than 100 regular season games.
Right.
And now he's played, 100 and something with Chris Paul. And then you get into the playoffs, you're getting to 150. So the majority of his career, he's just been asked to fill this relatively simple offensive role. So I think you look back at the numbers he posted his first two seasons when he was playing with, vastly worse point guards, and you feel like, okay, he was still pretty efficient. He had the ball in his hands a little bit more. He was posting up a little bit more, and it wasn't a big detriment to the offense. But is that something on a winning team, on a playoff team, on a championship team that you really want as 15, 20% of what you're doing in an offensive system? I don't know. And I really mean, I don't know. I don't think it's too early to say that's not possible, but we also don't have a lot of evidence to say that it is. So I think you want, if you're targeting him, you want a point guard or a playmaker that is going to be able to work well with him, integrate him, get him the ball in the spots that he wants, and maybe build from there. But I definitely don't think if you're a team wanting to win that you should just say, let's go get DeAndre Ayton and he can be our scorer.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting fit within the Raptors because I think you could kind of look at it both ways. There's lots of good playmakers on the team, right? Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, they can make stuff happen with the ball, but none of them are, I would say, a traditional sort of pick and roll operator. And the Raptors don't run them very much pick and roll at all. And so I'm curious how that would kind of work with Ayton. Can you run him from the elbows and sort of run him with a lot of the stuff the Raptors tend to do with handoffs and things like that? Maybe, that's certainly there, but it's, the way he's had to play or been asked to play with Chris Paul, it is difficult to evaluate him independent of that for sure. And I guess my question to you, Brendan, is like, how gettable is Deandre Ayton? Like, what's the number some team's going to have to throw at him for the Suns to back off? Obviously, Robert Sarver is Robert Sarver. We know all about him. We know they're paying a lot of money already to Bridges, Booker, Ayton. Sorry, not Ayton. Chris Paul. Is there like a sort of walkaway number that you think is out there? Is it like just the full max? Like, it feels to me like he's probably not a guy you want to throw the max at, but if that's what it's going to take, that's what's going to take. How do you think the Suns view Ayton when it comes to just like how eager they would be to keep him around if some team came across with a Godfather offer sheet?
Yeah, I think some of this has gotten a little bit lost in the Suns will never pay the tax kind of narrative that's formed because of the owner. One thing is, that complicates all of this. We don't know if that owner will be the owner by the end of the summer because there's still a pending investigation going on. So setting that aside,
that very huge story. Yeah.
A little something came along about November time, and we still don't know the results of any of that. So, but setting that aside, I do think, first of all, the Suns have paid the tax under current ownership before.
Sure.
They would be in the tax basically. It would be very difficult to get out from under the tax if they gave Deandre Ayton a max, as soon as next season, unless they just gutted the rest of their role player stable and just got rid of everybody. They're basically going to be in the tax. They also have an extension coming for Cam Johnson, who's been a really valuable player for them and somebody that I definitely think they want to keep around. That just makes it more difficult to move around without being, paying lots of money in that tax penalty. So that's kind of the stage setter. I don't think it's the number, because as willing as I am to kind of consider the fact that DeAndre Ayton might not be a Sun next season, that doesn't have to do so much with the dollar figure. I think, again, the Suns would go into the tax for this. I think that they've been expecting that a max offer would be there. We've heard people like Woj again say that there are numerous teams who are thought to be willing to give that. We know a lot of teams with cap space this summer also need a center, which is a nice little thing that worked in DeAndre Ayton's favor. So I think that there will be that max. I think the Suns, in theory, would be willing to pay it. I think the deal breaker, more so than the number in terms of money, is actually the number in terms of years, because the big holdup last year, the reason that an extension didn't get done, that Ayton became the only number one pick since like Anthony Bennett or Kwame Brown or whatever to not get an extension, is because the Suns were not willing to budge from the 4-year max that they wanted to give him, and Ayton's camp wanted the 5 years. Totally understandable, especially at that period of time when the extension is all that's on the table. You can't go get an offer sheet. You're not a free agent yet. So really you're negotiating 4 years or 5 years, or max versus no max. And why would you not hold out for the biggest possible thing? Made perfect sense then. Makes perfect sense now why Ayton would want that. Ayton's camp also says that they never offered him a 4-year, that the Suns never actually offered that 4-year max. We don't really know the truth there. James Jones, the general manager, very clearly publicly said that they did. Who knows? But I think that's really the sticking point. I think the 5-year max at this point for Ayton, an offer the Suns still could make to him, is basically off the table. I don't think that's coming. So really it's, would the Suns be willing to give him the 4-year max that they can give him, which is still 8% raises, so it's a little bit more money? Or do they just say, go get your offer sheet, 4-year max elsewhere, and we'll decide whether to match it or not? Or do they just say, screw it all, we'll just work with us and we'll help you find a team on a sign and trade, and we'll just get this done, tell you goodbye and move on? So I think that's kind of where we are. I think the tension, the sort of locker room stuff, whatever happened there, makes me a little bit more willing to believe that it could really be possible, and that the Suns might be wanting to move on, make their team a little bit more perimeter oriented, come up with a post Chris Paul plan, all that stuff. I think we might be there.
Well, if the Raptors are the team to potentially go and try to lure DeAndre Ayton to fix their quote-unquote hole at center, there's going to have to be some guys going the other way. We'll get into that conversation in just 1 second here with Brendan. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, who continue to be the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, the Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next year's NFL futures. What I would recommend right now is you take yourself over to betonline.net and you go and you find the Colorado Avalanche Edmonton Oilers game totals and just slam the over nonstop, because those teams are going to score 1,000 goals over the course of the next 2 weeks. It feels like pretty easy money to me. BetOnline is your continued source for all the sports wagering info you need, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, and learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, we round things out here. Let's piece together a trade, shall we? We'll have to be a sign and trade if the Raptors are to land DeAndre Ayton. And I will say, we're going to talk about Rudy Gobert next week. I think I'd probably prefer Ayton to Gobert. Just the number that Gobert's at till the year that he's at that number at gives me a little bit of queasiness. Also, rooting for DeAndre Ayton seems more fun than rooting for Rudy Gobert. I potentially could go and talk to DeAndre Ayton about video games and maybe get some sourcing going there. That would be fun too. But with that, something's going to have to go the other way. Brendan, can you clarify what the max number would be, like the starting number that the Raptors would have to match going the other way for Ayton on this extension? I'm very bad at cap stuff. I should have had this prepared beforehand.
That is okay. I want to make sure I'm getting the number right, because, again, it is different for the Suns with their 8% raise ability versus the another team. I believe it's 4 years, about 120 or so, 120, 130 million is effectively what it is. Yeah, the Suns can offer 4 years, 137. The Raptors or any other team would be just a touch below that.
Yeah, so you're looking at north of 30 million a year as the incoming salary, and with the Raptors being as close to the tax as they project to be going into next season, and they're not going to pay the tax next season, I can almost guarantee you that. That's all got to be considered. And so that leaves the Raptors in a bit of a tricky spot, right? Because they have some guys on very movable contracts, but to get to the number of a DeAndre Ayton, they'd probably have to piece a few different guys together. I guess we should start with OG Anunoby, who was in conversations yesterday from the Jake Fisher Bleacher Report. You can go listen to my episode from yesterday when I talked about the OG rumors and why I don't think there's a whole lot of noise to them. But if a trade is going to happen, his contract is one of the most easily movable. Not that I like talking about players in terms of how movable their contracts are, but hey, it's the offseason. We got to do it. Adding stuff into that then, kind of complicates matters for the Suns, roster spaces and things like that. You could probably piece something together with Gary Trent Jr. and OG Anunoby, but that deprives you of a lot of shooting. The same issue that I talked about yesterday with the Rudy Gobert potential trade. So it might be something where it's OG plus a few other sort of salaries you cobble together. Kem Birch kind of being the very clear $7-8 million salary that you could add into OG. Is there anything in terms of a Raptors package that you think the Suns would be interested in if you could cobble the pieces together? I don't love getting too specific with the numbers, because teams figure this out. That's what they have cap people for. They would get it taken care of. But a basis of Kem Birch, OG Anunoby as the return for DeAndre Ayton in a sign and trade. Do you think that's enough for the Suns? OG would add to their sort of list of excellent wings. You would have OG and Bridges on the same team, which feels more or less impenetrable to me if I'm an opposing offense trying to score. But obviously it leaves the center position a little bit bereft. Thoughts on a package centered around OG and Kem Birch with the other particulars to be figured out at a later date?
Yeah, and to open a rabbit hole and then quickly close it here, the nightmare of organizing a DeAndre Ayton trade, you should be glad that you don't cover the Suns, because the base year compensation, which is a rule that if nobody's heard of, you should be lucky that you've never heard of this, because the NBA has rules about this stuff. So when the Suns send DeAndre Ayton out in a potential sign and trade, he counts as a different amount of money than he counts for the incoming team. So it is a complete nightmare. Basically what you're looking at is, and the reason that Suns fans perked their ears so much when this OG Anunoby news came down is, his salary figure is basically exactly the sweet spot for what you're looking for an Ayton trade, because the Suns can't take back more than about $19 million in a trade. And Ayton would count as about 24 going to Toronto. So really what that ends up meaning is, like you said, you got to add a bunch of dumb little, like this guy who's on this small contract and this guy who's on a little bit of it. You have to do all that stuff. But really what you'd be looking at is effectively Ayton for OG straight up would be sort of like the starting point. Or Gary Trent actually fits that as well, although he's understandably a little bit less desirable just as a two-way player and for what the Suns need. Although, he would help some of their perimeter scoring stuff. So that's kind of what you'd be looking at. And I think the Suns would be pretty excited if they could get a player of Anunoby's caliber. I mean, just for comparison, like I did a big show last week talking about, hey, what if the Suns could get Clint Capella and the 16th overall pick from Atlanta? Wouldn't that be a swell deal? So that's the kind of like bad value that teams tend to get in these sign-in trades. It's rare that you see a team get really, really good stuff back if they're getting rid of a player on a sign-in trade, just because of that salary, because they don't have leverage, right? I mean, the player's already decided they want to leave. If the team doesn't want to match that contract, then it's at that point, it's like, okay, well, go ahead, leave, or we'll give you very, very little to confirm that you're not going to match this contract. But at the end of the day, the Suns wouldn't have much to do at that point if they really didn't want to match it. So you don't see major pieces moving. So, long story short, Anunoby would be probably the single best player that we've heard theoretically could be available. Although I don't know how you feel about that the Suns could just get in a sort of 1-for-1 swap.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time envisioning the Raptors being okay with that 1-for-1 just because OG checks so many of the boxes that they look for in players, right? And Ayton, while versatile, he has those questions we talked about in the last segment. Gary Trent Jr., though, that's interesting. Like that tickles my fancy. And if it's tickling my fancy, it probably means it won't tickle the Suns' fancy quite as much, because that's how trades work.
You'd probably be looking at then you might think, okay, could we see if Khem Birch is a player who could be added to that, and then maybe a first round pick as well, or something like that, just to settle the difference. That would probably be where I would think if it was Trent. It would be like Trent, Birch, and a first round pick, and then some other stuff from the Suns side going back. Torrey Craig is a player that wasn't really in their playoff rotation. They might be looking to move. Cameron Payne, the backup point guard, things like that. That would be what I think would happen on the Trent side. Although he's not obviously no bad player, and he's young himself. So
he's certainly he wants some bench scoring behind Devin Booker. Certainly you could probably play him next to Booker and Paul and just have him rain in a parade of wide open threes for you as well. He's pretty good at that. Although he's better at hitting them when people are directly in his face, because he rocks like that. Because he's cool. But yeah, the Trent, Birch, and a pick or something, that I think is probably as far as I'd be comfortable going if I'm the Raptors. OG, I guess it depends, right? If the rumors that maybe he's got some discontent with his role, which our pal Scotty Barnes was quick to dispatch on social today, I think maybe there's something there. But I made the point on my show yesterday, the Raptors aren't trading OG Anunoby for a worse player than OG Anunoby. They're trading OG Anunoby as part of a bigger picture thing to go get a superstar, or they're hanging on to him because they have no incentive to move on from a guy they have signed for the next 3 years at a very reasonable figure who hits 40% of his threes and is one of the best defenders alive. You don't just trade those guys away. You don't see the Suns being like, what can we dangle Mikal Bridges for to help with our depth? That's not a thing that you do. So yeah, I would say probably pretty low likelihood that this Raptors Suns thing comes together. What would you say? Of all the different packages, whether it's that Trent, Khem and a pick, or OG, where would you sort of slot the Raptors in among the potential partners for the Suns that you've kind of talked about on your show and sort of gone through in your head in terms of likelihood? Yeah,
I tend to lean the same way, not obviously covering the Raptors day to day as closely as you, but when I saw the Anunoby news, I was thinking the same thing. This doesn't seem super likely. If it were to even get close, he would be near the top of the list. I mean, for the same reasons the Raptors value him so much, the Suns would too. And he would be an awesome get if the Suns did decide to move on from Ayton. They would have to figure out the center spot. But it's an easier thing to fill than a great wing. So if you get rid of your center and get a great wing, and then you have to go find a bargain bin center, I think that's an okay gamble to make. A lot of the other trades are pretty similar to the Trent thing, though. Capella, right. Miles Turner is a player that's been talked about for the Suns.
Sure. Terry
Rozier is another one that's come up. PJ Washington and Terry Rozier sort of package from Charlotte. So, I mean, it's scraping the bottom of the barrel at a certain point for the Suns, unless they really just strike gold and a team is just really excited to get Ayton and wants to go swing for the fences. But the Suns are not in a position of strength. Restricted free agency, they can match. They have the strength there, but these sign-in trades, they're not in a very strong position. So I think you're probably right. If it was Toronto, it would be something closer to that Trent deal. And if I'm the Suns, I don't know if that's really exciting enough for me to, make a quick decision. They can always just keep Ayton and decide, the trade deadline next summer, they could think about trading him again. So there's no rush. And I don't think Trent is going to make them rush.
And the thing to consider with Trent as well is he's a player option at the end of next year. So if he shows out, then you're all of a sudden paying him a lot of money and probably going through this whole rigmarole once again. In which case, we'll gladly have you on the podcast to talk about trading Gary Trent Jr. back to the Raptors in a sign and trade. But until then, Brendan, thank you so much for hopping on, man. This was great. Where can people check out all of your wonderful work?
Yeah, right there on the screen on YouTube at BrendanClean14, on Twitter. That's where all my stuff will be posted. Obviously, you can find Locked On Suns on your favorite podcast platform as well. If this stuff gets closer, I'll obviously be talking about it. We'll probably have to do another crossover, Sean, but until then, that's where I'll be.
Sounds good. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with the last episode of the week. I'll be away on Friday flying, so tomorrow will be our final show to close out the week. Might bring back our favorite game show that we came up with last week, Mid-Level Madness, so keep an eye out for that. If you haven't listened, go listen to yesterday's episode where I talked about the OG rumors, and go listen to the Chris Bosh, Pascal Siakam comparison episode from Monday as well. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen of the day. It's got to be Locked On Oilers, man, or Locked On Avalanche. That series rules. It's consuming my life. It's making me not care about the NBA Finals because the hockey's just so damn good. Go listen to both of those shows. They're crushing it, covering that wonderful, wonderful series. And go listen to Locked On Suns as well. Make that your second listen too, as Brendan's doing a great job there. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.